Now I'll tell you a new story, write what you think, and don't forget to like. Tom Harper got home a little later than usual, but still made it in time for dinner. It was an ordinary evening in the suburban house outside Seattle. The kitchen smelled deliciously of Emily's baked lasagna, and the living room was filled with soft jazz playing in the background, his and his wife's favorite playlist, which they listened to every night. At the entrance, Tom pulled off his dusty boots and hung his jacket on a hook. He looked around the cozy interior, the warm light of the lamps, the family photos on the wall, the colorful blanket on the back of the sofa. There was a feeling of peace and comfort in the air, and Tom couldn't help but smile. He always liked coming back to this quiet family corner after a long day at work. Here, his loving wife and son were waiting for him, what he worked for and what he sincerely enjoyed every day. "Dad, are you coming soon?" 17-year-old Josh's voice was heard from the cafeteria. "We're getting hungry here at practice," he added with a noticeable smile in his voice. Josh sat at the table, his chin in his hand, absent-mindedly leafing through a biology textbook. Tall, with slightly tousled blonde hair and a stubbornly upturned chin, he took after Tom in his youth. After school, Josh stayed late almost every day at practice. He played on the school football team and dreamed of going to college on an athletic scholarship. His son's smile always reminded Tom of the time when he himself was the same, full of energy, plans, and stubbornness. But most of all, he was proud of how attentive and kind Josh had grown. Despite his youthful maximalism, he always helped his mother around the house and tried to support his father if he came home tired. "I'm on my way, champion," Tom responded, walking down the corridor. In the dining room, he was greeted by a scene that seemed like real happiness to him. Two of his closest people were sitting at a round wooden table. Josh, still wearing a sweatshirt with the emblem of the school baseball team, was gesticulating energetically, talking about the recent training session. His cheeks were still flushed from his evening run, his hair was slightly damp. It was obvious that he had quickly taken a shower and immediately sat down at the table, not wanting to waste a minute of the family evening. Josh's eyes shone with excitement and youthful confidence, and Tom couldn't help but notice how quickly his son was growing up, almost a man already, but still just as selflessly open to the world. In front of him stood a plate with a mound of lasagna, from which steam rose, and next to him was a casually placed baseball glove and a smartphone with an open schedule of games for the coming weekend. Opposite her son was Emily, carefully pouring homemade lemonade into glasses. Her brown eyes looked at her son tiredly but kindly, a look that mixed tenderness, pride, and the slight worry typical of the mother of a teenager. A soft smile played on her lips, and the light from the pendant lamp emphasized the slight wrinkles around her eyes, the same ones that Tom liked to kiss in the morning. Next to her lay an open cookbook with notes in the margins and a folded linen napkin stained with sauce, a small detail, but so alive, speaking of the warmth of their small kitchen. "So how are our future champions?" Tom asked with warm humor, sitting down on an empty chair and rubbing his palms in mock impatience. "I'm starving. I hope they left me something." "I don't think so, Dad," Josh snorted. "I've run so much today, I'm going to eat all the lasagna." Emily looked softly at her son. "Leave it for your father, glutton. I made enough for everyone." Tom nodded to his wife with a smile. "It smells divine, Em. As always, your cooking is the highlight of the day." Emily smiled back, but somehow absently. Tom noted the shadow of weariness or thoughtfulness on her face. Emily often seemed lost in her thoughts lately. She still took care of the house, of her and Josh, but sometimes Tom caught her looking thoughtfully somewhere to the side, as if she was hiding something or worrying about something of her own. He reached across the table and gently covered his wife's hand with his own. "Everything okay? Rough day?" Emily winced slightly, as if she had been brought out of a trance, and answered quickly, "No, everything is fine. I'm just a little tired." Tom nodded understandingly. He himself often felt tired at work, and today he felt pleasantly tired too. All day, he and a team of engineers had been working on a new project at the energy company where Tom had worked for many years. The project promised to be successful, and Tom was pleased with the work done. By the way, he said, recalling the news of the day, we finished testing the new power supply management system today. The management is pleased, and they even promised me a bonus if everything goes according to plan. Hey, Dad, Josh gave a thumbs up as he ate his dinner. How about you finally buy yourself a new fishing rod and take me fishing? You promised. Tom laughed. Of course I promised. As soon as it gets a little warmer, we'll go right away. He looked at Emily, expecting to see her usual approval or a humorous comment about their male pastimes. But she only smiled weakly and looked away again, mechanically tucking a strand of light brown hair behind her ear. Tom noticed that she had barely touched her portion. Mom, you haven't tried it, but it turned out really tasty, Josh said, nodding at her plate. What? Oh, yeah, I was just thinking. Emily remembered and picked up her fork, breaking off a piece of lasagna. Tell me, how was training? Did the coach drive you again? Josh eagerly began to tell details, how he had worked on his serve, how his coach had praised him for improving his aim. Tom listened to his son, occasionally offering encouraging remarks, but at the same time keeping an eye on his wife. Emily tried to look involved in the conversation, nodding, encouraging Josh with smiles in the right places. But Tom felt that her thoughts were somewhere far away. After dinner, the family began to clear the table. Josh picked up the plates and carried them to the sink. Tom, having put the cutlery away, asked his son, "By the way, how about that biology project presentation? Did you do well?" Josh smiled wryly. "Yeah, it's all good. Michael, the financial consultant, helped me with some material on ecology. Remember, he talked about green energy? I put in a couple of his ideas. The teacher liked it." Tom tensed for a moment in surprise. Michael, a financial consultant? Emily, wiping the table with a rag, explained, "Yeah, Michael Roberts, our financial consultant who helps with Josh's college investments. He works in alternative energy, so Josh asked him for some advice on the project." "Oh, so that's it." Tom nodded, remembering. A few months ago, on the advice of friends, they hired a new financial advisor to wisely manage savings for Josh's future education and the family budget in general. Emily dealt with this issue mainly, met with the advisor, and discussed investment plans. Tom briefly met Michael a couple of times, a tall, confident man of about 40-something in an expensive suit, giving the impression of a professional. Tom was glad then that they found a sensible specialist. He could not imagine that she would remember him in another context. "Michael's a great guy," Josh chimed in enthusiastically. "He's so tech-savvy. He told me about some solar panels of the future, and he promised to take me on a tour of their office sometime." "Really?" Tom raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Sounds good." Emily quickly interrupted, trying to sound neutral. "Yes, he offered to show us how funds and investments work. Maybe you'll be interested too, Tom." "Maybe," Tom shrugged, starting to help Josh wash the dishes. "Although I have so much to do at work right now that I don't have time for an excursion." "Dad, please try to make time." Josh nudged his father with his shoulder in a friendly manner. "I'd like you to go too. Maybe you'll learn something useful." "Okay, we'll see," Tom answered peacefully. He tried to keep the conversation light, but a slight feeling of unease had already crept in. For some reason, the very fact that Michael had become so close to his family, he was already helping his son with the project, made Tom feel strangely uneasy. However, he pushed away the silly suspicions. Really, why worry? Emily herself had suggested that he get to know the consultant better. She wouldn't have done that if something was wrong. The housework gradually came to an end. Josh, yawning, said that he would go do his homework and go to bed. Soon he had to get up early for training tomorrow. Tom put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Don't stay up too late, athlete. You'll need your strength." I know, Dad. Good night." "Good night, Mom," Josh responded from the hallway, picking up his backpack with textbooks. "Good night, darling," Emily answered him quietly. She stood at the sink, leaning her hands on the edge, and thoughtfully looked at the sparkling cleanliness of the plates arranged on the draining board. Tom came up behind her and put his arm around her waist, gently pulling her toward him. He felt the tension in her shoulders and automatically ran his hand down her spine, as if trying to rub away the weight of her fatigue. The question burst from my lips. "Are you sure you're okay, Em? You seem a little distant lately." She exhaled slowly and turned her face toward him. For a moment Tom thought he saw tears in her eyes, but Emily blinked quickly and smiled tiredly, trying to hide her nervousness. He noticed how she clutched the corner of her apron a little tighter, a small gesture that always betrayed her anxiety. "It's okay, Tom. I'm sorry if I'm worrying you. It's just age, hormones, I don't know. I'm worried about Josh. He's leaving soon, college, a new stage. Everything changes so fast. Just yesterday, he was a little boy with scraped knees, remember? And now he's a grown man. Sometimes I feel like I'm missing something, like I haven't had time to give him everything." Emily's voice wavered, and she leaned a little closer to her husband, resting her forehead on his shoulder. Tom stroked her hand gently, curling his fingers around her wrist, and leaned down to say quietly, "I understand. I think every day about how we will be without our boy. But he will be fine, I am sure. And we will be fine too. We will cope, as always." He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. They were still wet, but now a timid smile was breaking through. Tom touched his lips to her temple and felt the tension slowly leave her shoulders. "You always keep everything inside, Em," he added quietly. "No need. We're together. We always will be." Emily nodded and finally allowed herself to breathe a little more freely, pressing her palm to his chest as if seeking support and an answer to all her worries in this touch. Tom felt her warmth and the familiar scent of her shampoo. His soul felt calm. He kissed the top of her head. It seemed that this quiet family evening was no different from hundreds of previous ones, except that Emily was a little quieter than usual. But Tom attributed this to the fatigue and worries common to parents of a graduate. Soon they went upstairs. Josh was already sitting in his room at his laptop, idly typing an essay. In the hallway, an old golden retriever named Buster raised his head as they passed and wagged his tail. Tom leaned over and patted the dog behind the ear. "Hey, old man, keeping watch again?" The dog snorted with satisfaction and lay down again. In the bedroom, Tom changed into a soft house t-shirt and shorts. Emily was already getting ready, throwing a thin robe over her shoulders. She sat down tiredly on the edge of the bed, as if collecting her thoughts. Tom sat down next to her and hugged his wife. "You know," he muttered, nuzzling his nose into her hair, "I really am a lucky man. I have you and Josh. Sometimes I wonder what I did to deserve such good fortune." Emily was silent, her hands trembling as she placed her palm over Tom's. After a few seconds, she answered quietly, "Josh and I are the ones who are lucky to have you." Tom smiled and kissed her cheek. He was pleased to hear these words. He lay down, hugging Emily. Outside the window, the rain was quietly rustling, a typical picture for Seattle. The measured noise of the drops was calming, making you sleepy. Before falling asleep, Tom managed to think that his life had been a success. There might be changes ahead, his son growing up, new financial issues, but they would cope together. He had a strong family and a beloved wife. He trusted Emily as he trusted himself, and he didn't foresee any storms on the horizon. A week later, there was trouble at work. The heating system in a large data center serviced by the company where Tom worked suddenly failed. Late in the evening, he had to stay late to urgently repair the equipment together with his colleagues. The servers were overheating, and it was necessary to urgently restore the cooling. Tom called home and warned that he would be late. Emily did not answer at once. There were several long beeps in the receiver before her tired voice said, "Okay, be careful. Josh and I have already had dinner. I don't know if I'll wait for you. I'm very tired." Tom advised her to go to bed and not to worry, promising to return quietly. The job took several hours. By the time the problem was fixed, it was well past midnight. The rain that had been pounding the hangar roof with intermittent force all evening had finally stopped. Tom, getting out of the shop and into the street, felt the cool night breeze touch his hot face. He tiredly ran his hand across his forehead, wiping away sweat and machine oil. It was pitch black night all around, only the streetlights in the parking lot cast yellow circles of light on the wet asphalt. Tom started the car and headed home. The roads were almost empty, the city was asleep. He turned on the radio to keep from dozing off behind the wheel. A quiet melody filled the cabin, but Tom's soul was uneasy. Some vague anxiety had crept in during the conversation with Emily, and now, when he was left to himself in the silence of the night, this feeling only intensified. Maybe it was the accumulated fatigue, or maybe it was the strange intonation in his wife's voice. Did she sound tense, even guilty? Tom tried to remember, but his head was buzzing from long work, and he decided not to wind himself up in vain. 1 o'clock in the morning. At last, the familiar turned onto their quiet suburban street. The Harper house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by neighbors' equally well-kept cottages, now plunged into darkness. But as Tom drew closer, he noticed something strange. Parked right in his driveway, next to the mailbox, was a car he had never seen there before. A silver pickup truck gleamed in the moonlight, a strange car that had appeared on his porch in the middle of the night. Tom's brows drew together. His first thought was, had something happened? Had Emily or Josh been visited by a doctor or the police? His heart sank. Tom quickly turned off the engine and jumped out of the car. The lights were on in the house, a rare occurrence. Emily usually turned everything off before going to bed. Stripes of light were shining through the loosely drawn curtains of the living room. Tom tiptoed to the window, trying to stay in the shadows, and cautiously peered inside. What he saw took his breath away. Emily was sitting on the sofa in the living room, and she wasn't alone. There was a man sitting next to her. They were too close to each other. Tom squinted, his heart pounding in his chest, so hard it felt like it was going to jump out. The man had his arm around Emily's shoulders, his face close to hers. In the dim light of the lamp, Tom could see that it was a stranger in an expensive dark suit, with neatly styled hair and an expensive watch on his wrist. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. The next moment she laughed softly at something he said, the laugh Tom knew and loved, the laugh that had always been the epitome of home to him. But now the sound cut through his heart like a hot knife. His throat tightened. Tom backed away from the window, feeling the ground slipping away from under his feet. His fingertips grew cold, as if the blood had drained from his entire body. No, it can't be. Pounded in his temples. He clutched the windowsill with his palm, trying to stay on his feet. Spots swam before his eyes, and for a second it seemed to him that he would go blind from the sudden emptiness in his head. He tried feverishly to find some explanation. Was this a misunderstanding? An old family friend? A brother? A colleague? But every time he looked at the man's hand slowly sliding down Emily's back, these pathetic guesses were cut to pieces. They were sitting too close, too intimate. Friends and colleagues did not sit like that. Only those who had long ago thrown caution to the wind did. His thoughts were darting around in his head like moths trapped in a jar. Tom suddenly remembered their conversation just a few hours ago, her tired look, her words about Josh, about hormones, about age. It all came crashing down on him in a new wave, too many vague phrases, too many strange little things he didn't want to notice. He took another step back, and a branch snapped under his foot. Tom covered his mouth with his hand to keep some wild, primordial sound from escaping a scream or a groan he himself did not know. His chest burned from his furious breathing, but his brain was cold, almost icy. A sticky, heavy horror rose up inside, intertwined with anger and resentment. "Oh God, Emily, what are you doing?" He breathed out through his lips, unable to believe that these words were about his wife. He looked out the window again. Now they were talking in low voices. Emily nodded, adjusting a strand of hair behind her ear, and this gesture of hers, so familiar, suddenly became alien. Tom felt like an alien in his own home, an alien in his own life. For a second, he wanted to throw the door open, rush in and scream, demanding an explanation. But his legs wouldn't obey him. Instead, he pressed his forehead against the cold glass and watched as the world he had spent years building collapsed. Tell us about yourself, where are you from, and what interesting experiences have you or your friends had? Trying not to make any noise, Tom crept up to the front door. It was unlocked, just closed. His heart pounded harder and harder in his chest. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, not really sure what he was going to do. Call the police, but what was the point? A burglar would hardly sit on the couch and hug the lady of the house. Or film the whole thing as evidence. The thought flashed through his mind instinctively. His hands were shaking as he carefully pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. The doorway opened onto the living room. Tom paused in the shadows of the hallway. The scene was clearer than it had been through the window. Emily was indeed sitting, her body pressed against him, and he had one arm around her, the other caressing her knee. On the coffee table in front of the sofa was a half-empty glass of wine Emily's favorite red, a Merlot, which they usually saved for special occasions. "It's madness," the stranger whispered in a soft baritone, and Tom caught the words. "But I'm glad you called today." "Me too," Emily answered quietly, clinging to him tighter. "I really needed a distraction, to forget for a little while." Tom's vision blurred. In a moment, he would do something he couldn't turn back from. He would scream, attack this guy with his fists. But what would happen next? He imagined Josh's terrified face if he woke up from the scandal. He imagined how hatred would distort Emily's features, or, even worse, how indifference would descend like a mask on her face. No, now was not the time. Repressing the impulse with difficulty, Tom retreated as quietly as he had come. He did not enter the living room. Trembling all over, he went back out onto the porch. His temples were pounding, his heart had lost its rhythm. It seemed as if the air had become thick as jelly and was not enough. Tom went down the steps and, stumbling, almost fell. His legs did not obey him. He reached his car and slammed the door, louder than he intended. For a second, the voices inside the house fell silent. They must have heard the noise. Tom started the engine frantically, trying not to think about anything except getting as far away as possible. The headlights picked out the gray silhouette of a pickup truck from the darkness. Hatred and pain flared in his chest. He wanted to ram the damn car, smash it to pieces, as if that would change anything. Instead, he just slammed his fist on the steering wheel, venting his rage. Pulling out of the yard, Tom pulled to the end of the street and stopped at the curb. His breath caught in a sob. Only now did he realize that his eyes were wet, either from the rain, which had still been falling in a fine drizzle when he ran out of the house, or from tears. He sat down, his head dropped to the steering wheel. His chest was torn by a silent scream that never came out. Minutes or hours, he didn't know how long he sat there, trying to process what had happened. The image in the living room kept coming back to him. Emily smiling at another man, clinging to him. Tom closed his eyes, as if that would banish the vision. How could she? Why? Unanswered questions rushed through his mind. Only this morning he kissed her. Only yesterday they laughed together about something. Was it all a lie? Or was he blindly ignoring the obvious? The night air through the slightly open car window was damp and cold. Gradually, the feverish beating of his heart began to subside, replaced by an icy emptiness inside. Tom raised his head. There was no point in going home. The house was no longer a home. There, beyond the walls, were strangers to each other, his wife and her lover. This thought again made him want to either howl or smash the glass with his fist. But beneath the pain, somewhere deep inside, a plan was already forming. Tom knew he needed proof. What he had seen would be etched into his memory forever, but that wouldn't be enough in court if it came to divorce. And Emily, he knew her, would deny everything if he barged back in right now. No, he had to do something different, as coolly as possible. He wiped his face with shaking hands, turned on the headlights, and pulled away. He drove slowly and thoughtlessly, circling the surrounding streets. He knew the nearest all-night diner, a couple of miles north. That's where Tom headed, feeling that the rest of this damn night would be better spent away from his own home. In a dimly lit diner with a neon sign, Tom ordered the strongest coffee. The bitter hot drink sobered his mind a little. Towards morning, when the sky began to brighten, he made a decision. He would go back when his lover had already left, and for some reason Tom had no doubt that he would not stay until the morning. Emily would certainly want to hide her misdeed at least from her son. Then, then he would have to play a role, collect evidence, so that the truth would be on his side. Tom's head was buzzing, but a plan was slowly forming. As the first pale rays of dawn broke over the eastern sky, he drove back to his house. The silver pickup was gone. The outside of the house looked peaceful and quiet, as if nothing had happened. Tom took a deep breath, suppressing the lump in his throat, and prepared himself for the hardest morning of his life. Tom quietly inserted the key into the front door and tiptoed into the house. It was early morning, a gray, cold Seattle morning. The living room still smelled of wine and Emily's light perfume, the scent of the night that had broken his heart. Tom clenched his fists, trying not to smash everything around him. A blanket lay on the floor in front of him, carelessly thrown off the couch. The scene from the night before was still fresh in his mind, and it made him feel sick inside. He walked quietly up the stairs. The bedroom was dark, only a narrow strip of morning light filtered through the curtains. Emily was asleep on the bed, covered with a blanket. Her light brown hair was spread out on the pillow. Her breathing was even. Tom looked at her from the doorway for a few seconds, feeling how resentment and anger fought with painful love. This woman had been his support and joy for 20 years. And now, he shook his head, driving away pity. Tom quietly closed the bedroom door and went into his office, a small room on the ground floor where his computer and paperwork were kept. Here he tried to collect his thoughts. The first thing he had to do was to tell his office that he wouldn't be showing up. His voice was hoarse when he called his boss, citing a sudden cold. His boss tried to sympathize and told him to get treatment. Tom hung up and sat for a few minutes, staring blankly ahead. A cold. In fact, inside he felt like he was sick, deathly ill from the truth being revealed. But there was no time to indulge in feelings. If Emily woke up and realized he was suspicious, she might destroy the evidence. Tom knew he had to act while she was in the dark. He knew what Emily usually did in the morning, come down about 30 minutes after waking up, after Josh had already left for school, or like now, for a weekend sports camp. And then Tom remembered, Josh had spent the night at a friend's house after yesterday's late practice, and they had agreed that Josh would go straight from there to an away team game in the morning. So now it was just him and Emily at home. This thought made him feel better. At least his son hadn't seen or heard yesterday's nightmare. Tom sighed and set to work. He turned on Emily's laptop, which she usually left on the kitchen table. The password. Damn, the password. Emily had recently changed it, and Tom didn't know the new one. The panic that was sweeping over him threatened to paralyze him, but he took a deep breath. After all, he was the network administrator for his home, plus an engineer technology was his thing. A few minutes later, Tom booted from a flash drive and bypassed the password, logging into the system. The screen lit up with a splash screen, a family photo from last year's lake vacation. Emily and Tom were smiling, holding Josh in their arms, the water and mountains glittering behind them. The image made his heart clench, but Tom looked away and began searching. He opened Emily's mail. Looking through recent messages, he found nothing suspicious, mostly newsletters and correspondence with colleagues on the charity committee of which she was a member. Then Tom checked the sent folder and the trash, and lo and behold, there it was. Several letters from an unfamiliar address, signed with the initials Mr. He immediately recognized Michael Roberts, their financial advisor. His hands shook as Tom began to skim the text. Emily, I can't stop thinking about our meeting. You're an incredible woman. Tom felt the blood rush to his face. Then, a mention of a hotel room last week. Promises to fix everything, to make her happy. Tom gritted his teeth, forcing himself to read on. In Emily's letters back, Michael, I think about you too. I feel scared, but also happy. Tom doesn't suspect a thing. The line swam before his eyes. He pulled out the flash drive and copied the entire correspondence, saving the screenshots. Each word was a blow to the heart, but Tom continued. He dug further and found the chat archive. Apparently, they corresponded in the messenger as well. There were also photos attached. Michael, smiling at the camera, a tall brunette with a piercing gaze, indeed the same man Tom had seen a couple of times at meetings. In another photo, Emily takes a picture of herself on the front camera at home, sends it to him. Tom recognized the background, their bedroom. Judging by the date, it was a month ago during the day when he was at work. Tom squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the visions of Michael walking around his house in his absence. What a fool he had been to trust this family helper. And then there was more. Bank statements, which were accessible on the same laptop, showed transfers. A few weeks ago, a large sum had been transferred to the account of some private foundation. Tom quickly checked the details. The foundation belonged to the financial firm where Michael Roberts worked. It seemed that under the pretext of investing in her son's education, Emily transferred the money directly to her lover. Whether he was planning to abscond with it or whether he actually invested it, it didn't matter now. The evidence was there. Tom printed out the most salient letters and transactions on his home printer. The noise of the printer finally caught his attention. Footsteps came from the bedroom. Emily was coming downstairs. Tom gathered the printouts in his shaking hands and glanced at his wife, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway. Emily was wearing a robe. Her hair was disheveled, her face sleepy. When she saw her husband, she blinked in surprise. "Tom, why are you home? You left for work early." She clearly hadn't expected to find him there. Perhaps she thought he'd left long ago without seeing anything. Tom felt anger rising in his throat. He threw the papers on the table between them. The sheets of paper fanned out across the tabletop. "Maybe you could explain what this is," he asked hoarsely, almost in a whisper from anger. Emily froze. Her gaze fell on the printed pages. He saw her recognize the text of the letters. The blood drained from her face. She staggered and grabbed the door frame. "Tom, I..." She opened her mouth, but the words got stuck. "You lied to me," Tom said, syllable by syllable. "How long did this go on? Months? Years?" "No, not years," she whispered, taking a step forward with her hand outstretched, as if pleading. "Tom, please, let me explain." He pulled away, not allowing her to touch. "Explain?" he asked bitterly. "You slept with our financial advisor, Emily, Michael Roberts. You let him into our house, into our bloody bed." Emily burst into tears, pressing her hands to her chest. "I didn't mean to. It just happened. Tom, understand, I was alone. You were always at work. I felt useless, getting old. And he supported me, yes. I was looking for comfort. We both were looking for comfort." "Shut up," Tom's voice broke. He didn't scream, more of a rasp of pain, but it sounded even scarier. He took a step toward her, resisting the urge to grab her and shake her. "Not another word. Don't you dare make excuses." Emily covered her face with her hands, crying, "I'm sorry. Forgive me. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" Tom smiled bitterly. "It was a mistake to trust you. It was a mistake to marry you, for that matter. 20 years of marriage, and this is how you repay me." "I loved you. I love you," she sobbed. "Don't you dare talk about love," Tom said, feeling his eyes fill with tears again, but not allowing them to spill. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have traded your family for this." He almost cursed. This guy. There was a heavy silence, broken only by Emily's sobs. Tom sank tiredly into a chair. The papers lying before his eyes, witnesses to her betrayal, blurred. He ran his hand over his face. "What are you going to do?" came the quiet, trembling voice of his wife. Tom was silent for a few seconds, then looked up at her. "I'm filing for divorce." Emily gasped as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "No, please, give me a chance. For Josh." Tom smiled bitterly at his son's name. "For Josh? Were you thinking about him when you were hanging out with your lover? When you jeopardized his future by transferring him money? Emily shook her head frantically. He promised to return everything with interest. I didn't think it was risky. Of course I didn't. Tom waved his hand dismissively. You didn't care, as long as you are happy. He stood up. The whole decision had already matured within him. The only thing left was to tell his son. The thought gave Tom a painful sting. Josh. How to tell the boy that his mother had betrayed him? Looking at his wife's broken face, Tom suddenly realized that she was no longer really there, just a shell of the woman he once loved. He said tiredly, "Go away, Emily." She raised her tear-stained eyes. What? Where? To him, to my friends, I don't care. But I don't want you here by the evening. I don't want to see you. But the house, it's my house too. She tried to object plaintively. Not anymore, Tom answered harshly. This house is not yours anymore. It stopped being yours when you let a strange man in here. Emily lowered her head. She stood silently for a moment, then turned and walked slowly up the stairs, apparently to pack her things. Tom watched her go, feeling a strange emptiness. He thought he should feel triumph or even anger, but his heart seemed to have turned to stone. Half an hour later, Emily came downstairs with a small travel bag. She didn't even try to say anything. She just stopped at the door and said quietly over her shoulder, "Forgive me. I ruined everything. I'm so sorry." Tom didn't react. He stood by the window, looking out into the yard, where the asphalt was slowly drying after the night's rain. A new life was beginning outside the window without Emily. He heard the front door slam, and only then did he close his eyes, letting the tears flow. An unbearable pain pierced him as if someone had torn out half of himself and left him to live out his life in emptiness. The house was shrouded in silence. Tom suddenly noticed that all this time he had been clutching one of the printed sheets of paper, their wedding invitation, which had accidentally slipped into the general pile of documents. A white card with elegant letters, "Thomas Harper and Emily Jensen invite you to celebrate their union." 20 years had passed since that day. He did not remember why he kept this card, but now it seemed like a mockery. Clenching it, Tom slowly tore the cardboard in half. Tom sat on the porch of his family home, feeling the evening chill creeping under his shirt. The sun had already set, and the western sky was ablaze with sunset reflections. Tom had a folder of documents on his lap, a marriage certificate, copies of correspondence, all those papers that were now fragments of his family. He held them without realizing why, simply as an anchor in reality. Old Buster was quietly snoring nearby, his muzzle on his paws. The dog sensed his master's mood. During the day, he had followed Tom around, nuzzling his hand, as if comforting him. Now he sat down next to him on the porch, guarding Tom's silent solitude. In the distance, he heard the sound of a car approaching. Tom's heart sank. It was the school baseball team's minivan, returning from an away game. They had arranged for Josh to be dropped off right at his house. Tom stood up, trying to look confident, even though he was shaking inside. The bus pulled up to the curb. The door swung open and Josh jumped out, a gym bag slung over his shoulder. He waved goodbye to the driver and walked wearily toward the house, but when he saw his father, he quickened his pace happily. "Hey, Dad," Josh smiled, apparently pleased with the game. "We won, 5-2. I scored 2 runs. You should have seen me hit in the 8th inning." He stopped short as he came closer. The joy on his face had turned to worry. Tom realized he hadn't been able to hide his emotions. He must have looked exhausted. Josh looked him over, then asked quickly, "What happened? Where's Mom?" Tom felt his throat tighten. He nodded toward the step next to him. "Let's sit down, son. We need to talk." Josh slowly lowered himself onto the top step of the porch, dropping his bag at his feet. Buster gave a soft bark of greeting, but Josh merely patted the dog absent-mindedly, his eyes never leaving his father. Tom sat down next to him, a little lower, so that he had to raise his head to look his son in the face. For a few seconds, he didn't know where to begin. The only thought that was pounding in his head was, how can I say this to my own child? Finally, he spoke, trying to keep his voice even. Josh, you've probably noticed that something's been wrong with Mom lately. She's been distant. Anyway, Tom swallowed, feeling his hands tremble traitorously. He clenched his fingers. I want you to know that what I'm about to say has nothing to do with you. You're not to blame for anything. Do you hear me? Josh's face went pale. He remained silent, but his eyes became frightened. Tom continued, searching for words. Your mother made a mistake, a huge one. The word stuck. Tom closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his courage, then blurted out, she cheated on me, son. She had an affair. There was an oppressive silence. A cricket chirped in the distance, but on the porch, all that could be heard was Josh's sharp intake of breath. What? Josh looked at his father as if he couldn't believe his ears. Tom felt his eyes sting with tears, but he held on. He pulled out one of the printed sheets of paper, a copy of the email with the name Michael clearly visible. He handed it to his son. Josh stared at the paper for a few seconds, then picked it up with a trembling hand. He glanced at a few lines. Tom saw his son's expression change, bewilderment, shock, then his features froze in an expression of rage and pain. Is this Mom's mail? Josh asked quietly, although the answer was clear. Tom just nodded. Josh crumpled the paper with trembling fingers. With whom? Who is this? Michael. Our financial advisor, Tom replied, trying to sound calm even though he was seething inside. You've met him, Michael Roberts. Josh's eyes flashed with recognition. This guy, he clenched his fists. The one who came to talk to us about college. The one who told me about energy. Tom nodded again, unable to add anything. He saw his son's lips trembling, either from anger or from tears. So, Josh swallowed hard. So, while you were working hard, his voice broke, and Mom, he didn't finish, jumped to his feet and slammed his fist against the wooden porch railing with all his might. Buster, the dog, barked in fear. Tom quickly stood up, grabbing his son by the shoulders. Josh, watch out! But Josh broke away, tears of rage shining in his eyes. He began pacing the porch, clenching and unclenching his fists. How could she? He shouted, looking not at his father, but somewhere to the side. How could she do this to you, to us? Tom sighed heavily. He hadn't expected any other reaction, but his heart was breaking watching his son suffer. I don't understand it myself, son, he said quietly, but it happened that way. Josh stopped and turned sharply to his father. Where is she? Where is Mom now? I asked her to leave, Tom replied. She left. To him, Josh's voice was filled with disgust. I don't know, and I don't want to know, Tom said firmly. They were silent for a few moments. Then Josh sat down on the step again, his face in his hands. His broad shoulders shook. Tom sat down next to him and hesitantly put his arm around his son's back. Josh, I know you're hurting right now. Me too. But we'll get through this, you hear? We're men, we'll get through this. The son raised his tear-stained face. Dad, he sobbed, I don't want to see her anymore. Tom patted him on the back. Don't say that. She is your mother after all. She betrayed us, Josh shouted angrily, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white again. I will never forgive her for this. Never. Tom paused, then nodded. I understand. I probably won't be able to forgive either. At least, not right now. Josh bit his lip, trying to hold back his sobs. Are we going to live without her now? Just the two of us. About that, Tom exhaled. Like I said, I asked her to leave, and I'm going to file for divorce. You're almost 18. You have the right to decide who to stay with. I would like you to live with me. But if suddenly you want to stay with her. He couldn't finish, imagining his son leaving for Emily. Josh even shook his head in surprise. Are you kidding? Of course I'm staying with you, Dad. He hugged his father impulsively, pressing his forehead to his shoulder. I'm not leaving you. Let her go to that bastard of hers. Hearing the offensive word, Tom pulled back a little and looked his son in the eyes. No need to be rude, Josh. I understand your feelings, but don't stoop to insults. Josh grimaced. I'm sorry. It's just, I don't have any other words for him. And for her. He stopped abruptly, turning away. Tom put his hand on his shoulder. Son, I don't know what's going to happen next. It's probably going to be hard, but we're going to be together, and we're going to get through this, okay? We've got each other, and we've got Buster, who's worried about us. He nodded toward the dog, who had quietly come over and nuzzled Josh's knee with his wet nose. Josh sighed and patted Buster on the head. Hey, kid. Yeah, we're not leaving you either. Tom felt a pang of bitterness as he thought about how their once strong family was now reduced to him, his son, and their dog. But he reminded himself that Josh was there. They could live with the rest. Josh wiped his eyes with his fist and asked hoarsely, What are you going to tell everyone? Friends? Relatives? I have to go to school tomorrow. They'll ask where Mom is. Tom thought about it. Neighbors, friends, the news will spread. But the most important thing is not to force Josh to lie. I won't hide the truth, he answered slowly. If they ask directly, I'll say that we're getting a divorce. The reason? I don't think we need to spread it. It's our personal business. If you don't want to, don't tell anyone the details. It's just between us. Josh nodded. They sat in silence for a while, watching the dusk fall. Finally, his son asked quietly, Dad, and you, will you ever be happy again? Tom winced at the unexpectedness of the question. He looked at Josh, who was looking seriously at the darkening sky. What to say? At that moment, it seemed that happiness was no longer possible. But for his son's sake, he tried to smile at the corners of his lips. Of course I will. Not right away, but I will. I have you, and you are my greatest happiness. Josh smiled weakly back, wiping away the last of his tears. I just love you so much, Dad, and it hurts to see you like this. Tom hugged his son tightly by the shoulders. I love you too, son. We'll get through this, I promise. They sat side by side on the porch for a long time until darkness finally enveloped the yard. Finally, Tom said, Let's go into the house. We both need to rest. Josh stood up and picked up his bag. Before he went in, he asked, You don't mind if if I don't talk to her for now? Tom shook his head heavily. It's your decision. I won't force you. I think she'll understand herself. Josh suddenly frowned. She called me a couple hours ago. When we were riding the bus, I didn't answer. Tom thought bitterly of how Emily felt now. She had lost both her husband and, apparently, her son. But he could not bring himself to feel sorry for her. Do as you see fit, was all he said. They walked inside. The house was empty. Tom felt a surge of determination. From now on, he would do everything to make sure Josh didn't feel lonely or inadequate without his mother. He would be both his father and his mother, if necessary. After Josh went off to his room, muttering that he just wanted to go to bed, Tom lingered in the hallway. His gaze fell on the family photo on the wall before the betrayal, when everyone was smiling. He slowly removed it from its frame. For a moment, he was tempted to rip it up, to erase the traitor. Instead, Tom put the photo in a drawer. There would come a day, perhaps, when the wound would heal, and he would be able to look at the past without pain. But not yet. That night, Tom and Josh fell asleep in the same house, for the first time without Emily. They both tossed and turned, each in their own room, and it seemed that sleep would never come. But time passed, and gradually the heaviness of the day was replaced by exhaustion. Towards morning, Tom fell into a restless sleep, still holding the folder with documents in his hands, as if holding on to it so as not to drown in a storm of emotions. A new life awaited them, full of uncertainty, but he knew one thing for sure. His son would be there. and for him, it was worth fighting and living on. Almost a month passed. The days dragged on slowly and monotonously. After that terrible night and the conversation with his son, Tom felt as if he was on autopilot. In the morning, he woke up before the alarm. His sleep had never become peaceful, made breakfast for Josh, drove him to school or to training. Then he went to work, where he mechanically carried out his duties, barely holding on so as not to think about personal things. In the evenings, he returned to an empty house, heated up dinner for himself and his son, pretended that everything was fine for Josh's sake. But as soon as the boy disappeared into his room, Tom powerlessly sat in the kitchen, staring at one point. And so day after day. Emily hadn't been home in weeks. Tom didn't know exactly where she was, and he didn't want to know. Maybe she was at a friend's, or at his place. She tried calling him a couple of times, but he hung up. She texted him a few times, mostly asking about Josh, trying to apologize. Tom didn't answer. He saved those messages only as a reminder that it was real, not a bad dream. 3 weeks after the incident, Tom, with the help of a lawyer, prepared the divorce papers. Everything turned out to be simpler than he thought. Emily was not going to contest anything. Moreover, through her lawyer, she conveyed that she agreed to any conditions. Apparently, guilt and shame did their job. The division of property arose only for Tom, the house. This house, where they had lived a happy life, and where their marriage collapsed. There were so many memories here, both good and bitter. One day, sitting in the living room, Tom stared at the family portrait above the fireplace. It was a picture of the three of them, smiling, hugging each other in front of the Christmas tree a couple of years ago. Emily's eyes were filled with genuine joy, Josh's eyes with adoration. Tom had thought he was the happiest man in the world back then. Now, just looking at the picture made him ache. He quietly removed the frame and turned the picture face down. The decision came naturally. He couldn't continue living here. Too many ghosts roamed these rooms, and even though the house legally belonged to both of them, Tom decided to leave it to Emily. So he told the lawyer the house would remain with his wife, and he would take his son, dog, and personal belongings. He didn't need anything else from the past. When Josh learned of the decision, he simply nodded. "Whatever you say, Dad, I don't care where we live, as long as we're together." And then came the day when they were packing. Emily had told them in advance that she would come for the rest of their things later, when they were not home. Tom was grateful for that. They did not need an extra meeting. Father and son walked around the empty house with boxes, packing their lives into them. Josh took only the essentials: clothes, favorite books, sports equipment, and baseball posters. Tom collected boxes of papers, tools, and his books. There was a separate box with photographs and family albums. He couldn't bring himself to look at many of the pictures now; they were too painful. He simply taped the box shut and decided that someday, when the wound had healed, he and Josh would sort through the photos together. Buster bustled among the boxes, sensing the change. At one point, the dog whined piteously when Tom carried his favorite bed out onto the porch. "It's okay, buddy," Tom reassured him, smoothing the fur on the back of his neck. "We're just moving. You're with us." The dog trustingly licked his owner's hand, as if understanding. By midday, everything they needed was packed and hauled away in a small truck that Tom had hired. New housing was quickly found: a small rental apartment closer to the city center, with 2 bedrooms and even a tiny balcony. Not a house with a garden, of course, but he and Josh didn't need much. Tom walked through the empty rooms of the old house one last time. There was the fireplace in the living room where they had spent Christmas. In the kitchen was the old oak table where so many family dinners had taken place. Tom ran his hand along the door frame where there were barely visible notches. He and Emily had measured Josh's height there every year on his birthday. The last mark was last year. There would be no more new lines on this frame. "Dad," Josh called from the street. "That's it, let's go." "Right now," Tom responded. He walked into the old bedroom, his and Emily's once cozy little nest. The room was empty. Only the sun poured through the window onto the faded lilac wallpaper. There was some change on the floor: a forgotten button or coin. Tom bent down to pick it up, and suddenly before his eyes appeared. There was the bed, Emily reading a book before going to bed. He came in, kissed her. These images pierced his heart. So many years of love, and all in vain. Tom squeezed the coin in his palm so hard that it dug painfully into his skin. Then he unclenched his fingers. The round thing fell to the floor, rolling into the corner. I don't need anything else here, he thought, and he resolutely left, closing the door behind him. The wind was fresh outside. Josh and the hired driver were already waiting in the car. Tom got behind the wheel of his SUV. Buster sat in the back seat next to Josh, his muzzle hanging out the window. As they pulled out of the yard, Josh suddenly turned around, taking one last look at the house. You know, he said quietly, I thought I'd miss you. But now, for some reason, I'm not sad to leave. Tom was silent, driving with concentration. In the rearview mirror, the outlines of the house where so many years had passed melted away. He felt both sadness and relief. Sadness because he was saying goodbye to the place where he had hoped to grow old with his beloved. Relief because he was leaving behind a place of betrayal. A home is not walls, he finally said quietly. A home is a family, and our family is different now, and we will build our new home wherever we are. Josh nodded and leaned back in his seat. Buster laid his head on his lap, and Josh absent-mindedly scratched the dog behind the ear. The new apartment greeted them with silence and semi-darkness. The windows overlooked the courtyard, where two large maples grew, casting shadows. The rooms, although small, were already partially furnished. A couple of simple sofas, a table, chairs. The landlady left the furniture, which was convenient, because Tom decided to leave his furniture in Emily's house, not wanting to share it. As he and Josh unpacked, they tried to put everything in its place at once. Tom unscrewed several boxes of kitchenware, putting plates and mugs in a cabinet. Josh was in his room laying out clothes and hanging posters. By the end of the day, everyone was more or less settled. They dined on the pizza they'd ordered, sitting right on cardboard boxes instead of chairs. They hadn't arrived yet. Josh even smiled. Dad, it's cool. Like a hike or a student dorm. Tom smiled too, though wearily. Yes, a little. Our bachelor life is beginning. After dinner, Josh went to his room to finish his homework, and Tom stayed in the kitchen, pouring tea into mugs. 2 mugs, one for himself and one for his son, out of habit. He noticed that he had automatically taken 3 mugs, the third one for Emily, as he had before. A bitter shadow passed over Tom's face, and he put the extra cup back. The lights of the night city were visible through the window. A horn was blaring in the distance, and one of the neighbors upstairs was turning on soft music. A new place, new sounds. Tom sat down on the windowsill with a mug of tea, allowing himself to simply breathe out for the first time. It was all official. The divorce was being finalized, and there was only uncertainty ahead. He caught his reflection in the dark glass. A tired face, a few new wrinkles, dull eyes. Okay, enough, he mentally scolded himself. Life goes on. Josh's laughter came from the room nearby. He was probably chatting with his friends online. The boy's life went on too, school, sports, friends. Tom had no right to drag him down into his depression. At that moment, the phone rang. The name Emily appeared on the screen. Tom froze. His heart twitched painfully, but he did not accept the call. However, almost immediately a message arrived. Sliding his finger, Tom saw the text. Signed all the papers. Tomorrow at the lawyer's. Thank you for leaving the house. I don't deserve this. Forgive me. Tom reread the words several times. No emotion, no anger, no pity arose inside. Only fatigue. He deleted the message and put his phone away. Night fell, the first night in the new place. Josh was long asleep, exhausted from the move. Buster settled on the rug next to his son's bed. Tom lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. Silence. No creaking floorboards in the old house, no rustling wood by the bedroom window. Everything was different. He closed his eyes. The memory of the last morning in the old house came back to him. the curtain fluttering in the bedroom window as he drove out of the yard. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe Emily had come back, hiding to watch them go. Tom pushed the thought away. It didn't matter now. More importantly, his son was breathing next to him in his sleep. That he had to think about his future ahead, choosing a college, training, preparing for graduation. These thoughts brought some relief. Tom concentrated on his plans. By the way, soon there would be a reunion of his university alumni. They invited him a couple of months ago. He hadn't thought about going then, but maybe it was time to take a break, to meet old friends. Josh would be busy with his own affairs, and he himself would not hurt to change the scenery. As Tom pondered these thoughts, he didn't notice how fatigue had taken its toll. He fell into a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in a long time. The divorce had yet to be finalized, but in fact, the period had been set. The family he knew was destroyed. But ahead, strangely enough, there loomed some faint, vague hope. Things could be different, just different than he had imagined. The first months after the move were a real test for Tom. Formally, life went on as usual. Tom worked, Josh studied and played baseball. Life in the new apartment was getting better. But inside both of them, there was a gaping emptiness. In the evenings, when they gathered for dinner, the conversation did not flow. Before, the family table was always filled with laughter, news, and squabbles about trivialities. Now, there was often a heavy silence. Tom tried his best to fill it. He asked about school, training, suggested watching a movie together. Josh answered, tried to keep the conversation going, but it was obvious that he was also having a hard time. Sometimes Tom would hear his son tossing and turning in bed at night or quietly getting up to drink water. Tom himself slept fitfully. As soon as he turned off the light, he would see the scene over and over again before his closed eyes, Emily in someone else's arms. Anger flared up instantly, depriving him of sleep. More than once, getting up in the middle of the night, he found himself in the kitchen with a strong whiskey in a glass, although he rarely drank before. He sat in the dark, clutching the glass, and fought the desire to throw it at the wall. A couple of times he couldn't resist in anger. He threw an empty sauce bottle into the trash can so hard that it shattered. Buster, awakened, would timidly approach at such moments, whining, and Tom, coming to his senses, would sit down next to the dog, stroke him, and whisper, "Sorry, old man. It's all right." In the mornings, he put on a mask of calm. Only the dark circles under his eyes and the sharp new gray strands in his hair gave away what it was costing him. Josh was acting like a good boy on the outside. Training, friends, studying, he seemed to be completely immersed in his work, just to avoid thinking about home. But Tom noticed warning signs. His son had become more hot-tempered. A couple of times Tom caught Josh in his room throwing a book on the floor or kicking his gym bag, venting some internal pain. When asked, he answered briefly, "It's okay, Dad. I'm just nervous about a game or an exam." Tom didn't press, but he was worried. Emily kept trying to make contact. Every week or two, she would send Josh messages, timid questions about how he was, how school was going. Her son either didn't respond at all or limited himself to monosyllabic "fine" or "okay." He tried not to mention his mother in front of Tom, but one day Tom noticed Josh deleting messages as soon as he read them and throwing his phone on the bed with clenched teeth. Tom only said, "I understand your anger, but you know, holding a grudge is a heavy burden. Not for her sake. For your own sake, try to let it go when you can." Josh didn't respond, pretending to be engrossed in his laptop screen. One day, an incident occurred that made Tom seriously worried. In the middle of an April day, he received a call from the school. Mr. Harper was called to the phone. The physical education teacher, a little embarrassed, reported that Josh had fought with a classmate right on the field after practice. The fight was quickly broken up, but Josh hit the guy pretty hard. His nose was broken. Both students were in the principal's office, and punishment was being discussed. The teacher asked Tom to come as soon as possible. Tom's hands were cold with excitement. He had reached the school in a matter of minutes, mentally cursing the traffic. Entering the hall, he saw Josh sitting on a bench near the principal's office. His son was staring dejectedly at the floor, his jaw muscles twitching. Another teenager was sitting in the next chair, his nose red from the blow, holding an ice pack. An angry woman, probably the victim's mother, was standing next to him, quietly scolding the boy in a whisper. Tom walked up to Josh. He looked up, his eyes red and full of dark anger and shame. "Dad," he squeezed out, biting his lip. "What happened?" Tom asked quietly, trying not to sound judgmental or panicked. Josh looked down. "It's nothing. It's my own fault." At that moment, the door to the principal's office opened, and the stern, gray-haired principal invited the parents in. Tom glanced at the other boy and his mother, who was glaring at Josh with disapproval. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes. It turned out that the reason for the fight was an offensive remark. That guy, Max, had been teasing Josh for a long time, making rude jokes. And then, after training, according to witnesses, Max said, "It's no wonder your mother ran away from you with such a crazy idiot like you in the family." The principal looked sternly at the other student. He confirmed this, lowering his eyes. Max's mother was embarrassed and stopped mid-sentence. Josh attacked the offender with his fists for these words, and although he is usually restrained, he could not stop here. Tom felt both rage and pain for his son at that moment. He clenched his fists under the table to keep from losing his temper. The principal decided to reprimand both teenagers and temporarily suspend them from participating in school sports for 2 weeks. Both will have to visit a school psychologist. The parents, of course, must also have educational talks. Outside the school, Tom led Josh to the car. They drove for a while in silence. Josh sat with his back turned to the window, his face still flushed from the recent fight and the shame. Tom stole a glance at his white-knuckled fists and asked quietly, "Are you hitting him very hard?" "No, really," Josh muttered. "Just a couple of bruises and a broken nose." "Were you punished severely?" "2 weeks without games and consultations with a psychologist," he responded mechanically. Tom nodded as he drove. He knew now was not the time to lecture. Better to let off some steam. "Listen," he began quietly after a pause. "I know why you lost your temper." Josh turned around abruptly. He had no right to talk about her. "I didn't," Tom agreed calmly. "It was very mean of him." I just couldn't hold back." The son's voice wavered. "He said nasty things, and then about Mom. I wasn't thinking, it just. Everything flared up." Tom pulled the car to the side of the road as they approached the house. He turned off the engine and turned to face his son. "Josh, I won't scold you for fighting. Honestly, I myself would almost attack this guy if I heard that." Josh looked up in surprise, and Tom continued, "But you're not just fighting him. It's like you're fighting the whole situation. This pain inside. Am I right?" The son was silent for a few seconds, then covered his face with his hands. "I can't. It's constantly in my head. Their faces. Mom's and that guy's. I feel so angry and hurt, Dad." Tom gently put his arm around his son's shoulders, pulling him closer. Josh didn't resist, although it was obvious that he was trying to hold on. "I know, my boy," Tom said quietly. "It hurts me too. But do you know when I get angrier? At night, when no one is around, I imagine yelling at them, fighting. And then there's just emptiness, and nothing changes." Josh took his hands away from his face, tears glistening in his eyes. "What should I do? How can I become like before?" "It won't be like that," Tom answered softly. "It will be different. We have a new life together, and we need to learn to live with it. Anger is natural, but if we let it control us, we will destroy ourselves. You don't want to get kicked off the team because of fights like that or problems with your studies." Josh shook his head silently, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "I don't want to either. Let's do it this way. You'll have meetings with a psychologist at school, and that's good. Talk to him honestly. Don't keep everything to yourself. And if you don't want to talk to a psychologist, talk to me. Anytime, about anything, do you hear? You can wake me up at night if you feel bad. I'll listen." Josh croaked, "Thanks, Dad." They sat in the car for a while longer. Josh pressed his forehead against his father's shoulder like he used to when he was scared of a thunderstorm. Tom gently ruffled his hair. His heart ached with pity and love for his son. "We'll get through this," he repeated quietly. "We definitely will. We just have to stick together and not let this pain make us worse." Josh nodded, taking a deep breath. "You know," he suddenly said, pulling away and trying to force a smile, "the psychologist at school will probably pester you with his questions." "Be patient," Tom chuckled slightly. "By the way, at work they also suggested that I go to a corporate psychologist when they found out about my divorce." "So you're going?" Josh was surprised. Tom shrugged. "I guess it's worth a try. I would have brushed it off before, but now, why not? Maybe a professional can help you let off steam safely." Josh looked at his father with respect. "You're really trying to move on, aren't you?" "I'm trying," Tom sighed. "For you, for both of us." They got out of the car. Buster greeted them at the door, barking happily, as usual. Josh frowned. "And you, have you forgiven her? You know, Mom?" Tom, who had bent down to pet the dog, froze. He stood up and looked his son in the eyes. "No, I haven't forgiven, and I don't know if I ever will, but I'm trying to let go of the evil. It makes me feel better." Josh didn't answer. He took off his shoes and walked into the room, saying over his shoulder, "I'm fine. I'm going to finish my homework." Tom understood that the conversation wasn't over yet. They were both just tired. The next day, he actually made an appointment with a psychologist, deciding that it certainly couldn't make things worse. Little by little, rays of light began to appear in their lives. At the end of the school year, Josh finally made it back to the team and helped them win the regional tournament. At the graduation ceremony, he received an award as the best player in the school. Tom, present there alone among the pairs of parents, felt bitter loneliness, but pride in his son outweighed it. Emily did not attend the graduation. Perhaps she thought her presence would cause even more pain. Or perhaps no one invited her. Either way, Tom was grateful that the evening passed peacefully. After graduation, Josh began to look into college. His athletic prowess had caught the attention of a couple of schools, and scholarship offers arrived that summer. Tom and Josh shared a joyful moment as they made their choice. These were moments when the past, at least for a time, receded and the future loomed. That summer, Tom went fishing with his friends for the first time in a long time, just as he had promised his son. He took Josh along. They sat on the shore of a quiet lake at dawn, casting their lines, and Tom found himself thinking that he hadn't thought about Emily or the betrayal for several hours. His mind was occupied with bait and small talk. It was such a relief that, returning home, Tom felt the stone on his chest become a little lighter. That same summer, there was a reunion of university graduates, which Tom decided to attend. He hoped to see old friends, to take his mind off his worries, and he did not suspect that it was there that a turn awaited him that would gradually change his whole life. At the end of the summer, Tom went to a reunion of his university's alumni, deciding it was time to get out there. The event was held on campus. First, an official reception in the old assembly hall, and then informal communication at the sports stadium, where a symbolic friendly match was even planned for the team's veterans. Tom parked near the familiar columns of the main building and sat in the car for a few minutes, watching the graduates of different years arrive. Some came with their spouses, some with friends. A slight jitter pricked him. He hadn't been here for many years, and his mood was different from the general joy. He had come alone, without a wife, without any particular victories, except that he had survived a difficult year. Finally, he pulled himself together. Looking in the mirror, his tie straight, his shirt neat, although his face was tired, Tom got out of the car. A stocky, balding man was already walking towards him, looking closely. "Oh my, is that Harper?" a familiar voice said. "Bill." Tom recognized his former classmate and lab partner. They hugged each other tightly. "How old, buddy?" "At least 20 years, Bill chuckled. "You haven't changed at all. Well, maybe you've gone a little gray." "You've gotten better looking too," Tom teased, patting him on his noticeable belly. Bill waved it off. Time doesn't spare us all. Let's go. Many have already gathered there. By the way, have you heard about your son? Is he growing up to be a champion? Tom nodded reservedly. We try. And you? Yeah, everything's fine. I'll tell you later. Bill quickly changed the subject, apparently noticing the shadow on Tom's face. Did you hear Emily didn't come? Tom tensed. No, she's busy. She couldn't. Bill squeezed his shoulder sympathetically. Got it. Okay, let's go inside. A good half of the group is already waiting for us. We'll have to say hello a second time. In the assembly hall, Tom really plunged into a whirlwind of handshakes, hugs, and memories. Classmates, teammates from the football team, their faces had aged. Someone had become flabby, someone had gray hair, but as soon as he spoke, the intonations of youth returned. Tom was overwhelmed by laughter, then by unexpected sadness when someone asked, "How is life? How is your wife?" When asked about his wife, he answered briefly, "We're not together." Most nodded tactfully, changing the subject. Although a couple of friends, known for their tactlessness, tried to joke, "They say your Emily ran off with another guy? Just kidding, just kidding." Tom only clenched his teeth and avoided answering. Apparently, rumors had already leaked out. News spreads quickly among old friends. After the official part, everyone moved to the stadium. The stands were full of refreshments, and 90s music was playing. On the green lawn, several former athletes were jokingly throwing a football around, recalling their youth. Tom took a bottle of water from the buffet table and, stepping aside a little, took a deep breath. The evening sun filled the stadium with a soft light. Here, on this field, they had once won so many victories. A picture suddenly appeared before his eyes. Young Tom throwing himself into the arms of a teammate after the decisive touchdown, the crowd roaring, their team winning the conference championship. And this teammate was Dan Reeves, the team's best receiver and a close friend. Dan was gone. He had died 2 years ago in a car crash, the terrible news that had once shaken Tom. He had been too busy with work to fly to his friend's funeral. But now the memory came flooding back. Here they were, 20-year-olds, reckless, celebrating a victory. Tom Harper? A soft female voice came from the side. Tom turned. A woman in her early 40s stood next to him, attractive, slim, wearing a light blue summer dress. Her shoulder-length brown hair was familiar, but sad. He recognized her at once. Melissa, Dan Reeves' widow. "Melissa, hi," Tom said quietly. They hugged, softly and warmly. Tom felt a pang of pain. So many years, and now they were meeting against the backdrop of memories of Dan. "I'm glad to see you," Melissa admitted, stepping back. "I thought you weren't coming." "I'm glad too," Tom responded. "It's been a while since we last saw each other, probably since that Christmas when you all came to visit us with your whole family." Melissa nodded. "Josh was just a baby then, playing with our son in the snow. It was so long ago." Tom was embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't ask. How is your son? He's probably about 14 already." Melissa's eyes gleamed with sadness. 15. Lives with his grandmother, my mother-in-law, in another state. I couldn't raise him alone after what happened and after everything." She trailed off, but Tom knew she was talking about Dan's death. He touched her elbow. "I'm so sorry. I was so sorry I couldn't come to the funeral. Dan was like a brother to me." Melissa looked at him gratefully. "I know. He values your friendship very much. He always told stories from his student years about your pranks, how you swam in the fountain at night, remember?" Tom smiled sincerely for the first time in a long time. "Of course, I remember. We almost got expelled then." Melissa smiled back slightly, but then the smile faded. Are you here alone?" Tom looked down. "Yes, Emily couldn't come." Tom could tell by the way Melissa looked at him. She'd heard. Maybe from mutual friends, or maybe she just guessed from his tone. "I'm sorry, Tom," she said quietly. He smiled wryly. "Everything is fine. Or rather, it will be fine. They were silent for a few seconds, standing slightly apart from the noisy group of other graduates. In the distance, someone laughed, throwing a ball, and the music started playing louder. Here, on the edge of the field, it was almost quiet. "It's strange, isn't it?" Melissa suddenly said. "We meet at a party, and both of us feel." "Not very festive," Tom finished. "Yes, that's how it turns out." She sighed, smoothing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I hesitated for a long time about going today. I thought I'd be superfluous after all. It's a class reunion, and I'm just the wife. Or rather, the widow of a graduate. But the guys from Dan's team insisted so much." "You're not out of place," Tom said softly. "You're part of our history. Dan would want you here." Melissa nodded gratefully. "And you? What made you get out?" Tom shrugged. Probably got tired of being alone with his thoughts too. Decided that some communication wouldn't hurt. "It certainly won't hurt," Melissa said warmly. "You know, it's hard to rejoin the crowd when you're hurting inside. I haven't seen any of our mutual friends in a while." Tom looked at her understandingly. He wanted to ask many questions, but now, in the idleness of the meeting, there was no place for confessions. Instead, he suggested, "Maybe we should step aside and talk calmly. It's noisy here." "Go ahead," she agreed. They walked along the stadium's running tracks, sitting down on a low bench at the very edge of the field. The sun was setting, gilding the tops of the trees beyond the fence. Tom shivered. The evening air had become fresh. Melissa noticed and asked solicitously, "Won't you catch a cold? Put on your jacket. Summer is coming to an end. The nights are cool." Tom obediently put on the jacket he had taken off. He even felt a little strange that someone was showing concern for him. "How are you now?" he asked cautiously. "After everything." Melissa ran her finger thoughtfully along the surface of the bench. "Oh, it's a long story. But, in short, I'm slowly coming to my senses. Work, friends supported me, although it can be very lonely." "I understand," Tom answered quietly. "After 20 years of marriage, to suddenly find yourself alone is scary." She looked up at him. 20 years, the same amount of time you and Emily have lived together, right?" Tom nodded, feeling the familiar prick. Melissa hesitantly touched his hand. "I don't interfere in other people's affairs. I just want to say, if you suddenly want to talk, I'm a good listener." Tom squeezed her hand gratefully. "Thank you. You know, I think I could use this, and I think you could too." Melissa smiled sadly. "Yes, two broken hearts have something to talk about." They exchanged phone numbers, promising to call each other in the coming days. Around them, the guests of the meeting began to leave. The evening was coming to an end. Tom walked Melissa to her car, trying to delay the moment of farewell. In her company, for the first time in a long time, he felt understood without words. "Take care, Tom," she said as she got into her car. "I'm glad we got to see each other, despite everything." "And you take care of yourself, Melissa," he replied. "Thank you for coming to me then, and see you soon." She left, waving goodbye. Tom stood for a few minutes under the starry sky above the empty stadium. Suddenly, his soul felt a little lighter. He thought about Dan, about Emily, about everything he had lost, but also about Melissa, about the familiar pain reflected in her eyes. They understood each other, although they had barely had time to talk. Tom got into the car and exhaled. For the first time in a long time, he was not looking forward to another gloomy evening, but perhaps to a new meeting with someone with whom he could share the burden. This thought warmed him better than any whiskey. A few days after their meeting at the stadium, Tom and Melissa agreed to meet again. They chose a quiet cafe by the lake on the outskirts of the city, a place where there was no fuss and where they could talk frankly. Tom arrived a little early and took a table on the open veranda overlooking the water. It was a clear day, and the wind gently rippled the surface of the lake. Tom found himself nervous, as if he were about to take an important exam. He didn't know how to start the conversation, but he knew he wanted to talk to someone who seemed able to understand. Melissa soon appeared at the entrance, and Tom rose to greet her. She was wearing a light blouse and jeans, without unnecessary pathos, simple, natural. "Hello," she smiled warmly. "Hi," Tom stepped forward a little awkwardly, offering her a hug. Melissa hugged him lightly, and the touch felt surprisingly natural. They ordered coffee and some pastries and were left alone, with only the occasional customers whispering at the tables nearby. They talked for a while about trivialities, about the weather, about how beautiful the lake was. But both felt that sooner or later the conversation would turn to something painful. Melissa was the first to decide. Taking a sip of cappuccino, she looked at Tom and began quietly. "I was thinking about the best way to ask, but I think the direct way is the best. What happened between you and Emily?" Tom looked down at his cup. Even after all the stories he had told his friends, the word betrayal didn't want to come off his tongue. But Melissa waited patiently, without curiosity, rather with sympathy. "She cheated on me," Tom finally said, "for a long time, with someone we trusted, our financial advisor." Melissa covered her mouth with her hand, gasping softly, "Oh, Tom." He smiled bitterly. "That's how it is. I found out about it by accident, I saw." He hesitated, remembering that terrible moment. "Anyway, I saw it with my own eyes." "Oh, God," she whispered. "I'm sorry. It hurts so much." "Painful is not the word," he smiled wryly. "That night I felt like the ground had slipped out from under my feet. I didn't make a scene, I just left. Then I gathered evidence so that—" Tom sighed. "I immediately decided that our marriage was over." Melissa listened without interrupting, only her eyes grew sadder. Tom continued, feeling a strange relief that he didn't have to choose his words, he could speak honestly. "There was a lot of anger, and there still is. But I try. For my son's sake, I try to hold on. He understood everything. He took my side, although for him it was a blow too." "How is Josh coping?" Melissa asked softly. Tom shrugged. "It depends. At first he said he hated his mother, didn't want to see her. Now he's cooled down a bit, but refuses to talk to her. He graduated this year without her." Tom shook his head. "It's hard for a boy. He even got into a fight because a classmate teased him about his mother." "Poor guy," Melissa sighed. "I'm sure he's a strong guy. He'll cope. He has you." Tom looked at her gratefully. "Thank you. I do what I can, although, to be honest, sometimes I don't know how to live on. For 20 years, we were like a single whole, and now—" He spread his hands. "Now I have to build a life from scratch." Melissa nodded, looking down at her cup. "I understand that very well." Tom asked quietly, "You said that you also experienced betrayal from Dan." Melissa was silent for a long time, looking at the trembling reflections on the lake. Tom was about to apologize for the direct question when she answered, "Yes, not long ago. A year before he died, I found out that Dan had had an affair. Short, fleeting as he claimed, but—" She took a deep breath. "The world collapsed. We grew apart. He left for a while. I thought about divorce." Tom listened with bated breath. "Then he came back, begged me to forgive him," she continued. "We started trying to fix things. I still loved him, but the trust wasn't the same. And then the accident happened. He was gone in an instant." Melissa closed her eyes, and a tear rolled down her cheek. Tom, without thinking twice, covered her hand with his. "I'm so sorry." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "Thank you. You know, it was a terrible mixture of feelings. Grief from the loss, anger at him for betraying me, guilt for my own anger. After all, he died, and I was angry. In short, I was on the verge of a breakdown." "You probably asked for help?" Tom asked cautiously. "Yes," she confirmed. "Several months of therapy, antidepressants. I gave my son to my mother-in-law for a while. I just couldn't take care of him mentally. I was like a walking shadow. I even had—" She hesitated, "bad thoughts. But I coped." Tom knew what she meant. His heart sank. "I'm glad you made it. You're very strong, Melissa." She smiled weakly. I'm not sure. I'm still broken in some ways. I've just learned to live with it. I'm learning too, Tom admitted. Sometimes I wake up and forget about everything for a second, and then it hits me again. Oh yeah, she betrayed me. There's no more family. Melissa squeezed his hand quietly. But we do have family. You have Josh. I have a son. They are our family now. You're right, Tom nodded. It keeps us afloat. They were silent for a moment. Then Melissa asked, "Were you able to forgive her, Emily?" Tom thought about it. An image of his wife flashed before his eyes, or rather, the one she had been before her betrayal. He shook his head. I let go of the situation as much as possible, but to forgive, no, I'm not ready. Maybe I never will be. And you? Have you forgiven Dan? Melissa did not answer for a long time, then said quietly, I think so. After his death, I had no choice but to forgive. Otherwise, this bitterness would have eaten me up from the inside. Over time, I remembered why I loved him and let go of what he did. But the scar, it remains. Tom nodded. Melissa's words echoed. The scar remains. Yes, they both had the same scars on their hearts. The conversation flowed smoothly, and the hour flew by. They shared stories about their children and remembered funny episodes from the past. Tom made Melissa smile with a story about how Dan and he secretly ate cake before a game and then almost threw up right on the coach. Then she with a warm memory of how Emily once taught her to bake a pie for a charity fair and all the dough crumbled, but they laughed while cleaning the kitchen at night. These memories no longer cut with pain. Rather, they brought on a bright melancholy and a feeling that there was good in life after all. The sun was setting. Empty cups and crumbs were all that remained on the table. Melissa looked at Tom, and there was no longer the same intense grief in her eyes, only a soft sadness and understanding. Thank you, Tom said quietly, for listening. Thank you too, she replied. I needed to talk too. He chuckled. So it turns out we're like each other's support group. Exactly, Melissa smiled. Broken Hearts Anonymous. Tom laughed softly. For the first time in months, it seemed, just at the joke. He felt at ease with her. No tension, no need to pretend. They stood up from the table, walking slowly toward the parking lot. The evening air was filled with the smell of water and grass. Melissa stopped at her car, but was in no hurry to get in. You know, she said, looking at the golden sky, not long ago I thought that I would never be able to talk to anyone like that again. That no one would care about my pain, and I wouldn't care about others. And now, you don't feel so lonely now, Tom suggested softly. She turned her gaze to him. Yes. With you, I don't feel it. You are the first person who really understands me. I'm glad I can give it, Tom responded. You understand me too, it's worth a lot. Melissa came a little closer, and Tom felt her warmth. His heart began to beat faster. It was not the same excitement as before the conversation, but some kind of pleasant, tremulous feeling. He suddenly noticed how green her eyes were, how softly a strand of hair fell on her forehead. Thinking about where his gaze had led, Tom became embarrassed and looked away. Melissa also took half a step back, as if coming to her senses. Sorry, I must have kept you. It's already late, she realized. It's okay, Tom shook himself. I don't want this evening to end. She smiled. Me too. But I have to go. Let's do it again sometime. Sure, Tom said warmly. Maybe next weekend? Josh is away at a tournament, and I'm free. Great. I have Saturday free too, she agreed. After a moment's hesitation, Tom threw his arms around Melissa. She pressed herself against him. There was so much understanding and tenderness in that embrace that Tom's eyes stung. See you later, Tom, she whispered, letting him go. See you later, Melissa. He watched her car drive away and felt something warm in his chest. Not just friendly sympathy, but something more, still timid but alive. Tom got behind the wheel of his car and smiled to himself for the first time without bitterness. Two broken hearts met maybe together, they could put the pieces together to form a new picture. Autumn flew by. Tom's life gradually filled with small joys that he had long forgotten. Every weekend he looked forward to seeing Melissa. They came up with different activities. Sometimes they went to the Sunday market outside the city, walked between the stalls with farm products, trying honey and homemade cheese. Sometimes they took Buster and went to the nearest park, where they walked along the alleys, talking about everything under the sun. At such moments, Tom caught himself feeling that he was simply happy in the little things. Here was Melissa laughing at his joke. Here was Buster joyfully running ahead, his tail stretched out. Here were golden leaves swirling around them. And no ghosts of the past, no pain, just the present moment. One day they went to the ocean coast. The weather was windy, but sunny. On a deserted beach, Melissa kicked off her shoes and ran to the water's edge like a girl. Tom watched her laughing, dodging the oncoming waves. His heart was filled with warmth. He joined in, and soon they were both soaking wet jeans up to their knees, but they were having a great time. Salt on his lips, the wind in his hair, and Melissa by his side. Tom couldn't remember the last time he had felt such bliss. Their relationship developed slowly, naturally. There were no loud confessions or a stormy romance, just two people who were good together, becoming closer with each passing day. Both were a little afraid of rushing, of getting burned again. But with each conversation, each shared dinner, the trust grew stronger. In early November, Tom decided to tell his son about Melissa. Josh, of course, had noticed that his father often went away on weekends and returned in high spirits. One evening, Tom sat down with him in the kitchen and calmly said, "Son, I wanted to share something with you. I met a woman. Well, I've known her for a long time, but we've become closer. Her name is Melissa." Josh put his textbook down, listening intently. Tom saw wariness in his eyes, but also interest. "She was my good fiance's wife," Tom continued. "She had a complicated story, too. Her husband died, and she also experienced betrayal in her marriage, just like me. We talked a lot, and it seems we understood each other." Josh chuckled. "Are you two dating?" Tom smiled. "I guess you could say that. I feel good with her, and I'd like to introduce you to her, if you don't mind." Josh was silent for a moment, digesting. Then he nodded. "If she's okay, why not? You look happier, Dad. I noticed that a long time ago." Tom felt relieved and touched. He came over and put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Thank you for understanding. And yes, I guess I really have become happier in the last few months." They agreed to have dinner on the weekend, inviting Melissa to their home. On the appointed day, Josh, nervously, even tidied up the living room and put on a more decent shirt. Tom noted this to himself with a smile. Melissa arrived that evening with a homemade pie. When she walked in, Josh sat up straight, embarrassed, instantly comparing her to the image of his mother. But Melissa didn't let the tension build. She smiled and extended her hand first. "You must be Josh. I've heard so much about you. It's nice to finally meet you in person." "Hello," Josh muttered, blushing, and shook her hand. "Nice to meet you too, I guess." Tom gave his son a warning look, but Melissa only laughed softly. "It's all right. If I were you, I wouldn't know what to say either." Over dinner, the tension gradually melted away. Melissa was a good conversationalist, asking Josh about school, baseball, and how she had played softball in her youth, and even been the captain of a women's college team. Josh raised his eyebrows in surprise. He hadn't expected that. "So you're athletic," he said with interest. "Yes," Melissa confirmed. "True, now my sports career is limited to jogging and yoga, but I love games. Tom said you have a friendly match soon. Can I come and cheer?" Josh perked up. "Sure, that would be cool. Dad will definitely come, but it's more fun with company." Tom smiled. "You don't consider me part of the company anymore?" "Not in that sense," the son waved it off. "It's just that the more fans, the better." Tom watched Josh sneaking glances at Melissa all evening. He could see that his son was beginning to like her. She quickly won Buster over too by treating him to a piece of turkey, and he spent the rest of the evening at her lap, begging for affection. After dessert, Melissa's pie turned out great. Josh volunteered to show Melissa the family album, the one that Tom had hidden away. To his father's surprise, his son could now leaf through old photos of Emily without the same anger, rather with nostalgia. The three of them looked at the pictures. Here was little Josh on Tom's shoulders. Here was the whole family on the shore of the lake. Melissa listened to the stories behind each frame, smiling or sighing sympathetically. "And this is your wife?" she asked quietly, seeing a beautiful young Emily in a wedding dress in one of the photos. Tom nodded. "Yes, it's been a long time." Josh quickly turned the page, changing the subject. Melissa caught the mood and didn't ask any more about what Tom was grateful for. When Melissa left, Josh suddenly said to his father, "You know, she's cool. Not at all like Mom." Tom tensed up. "What do you mean?" Josh searched for words. "She's kind and simple. It's easy with her. I love my mom, of course, but with her it was always, I don't know, it's difficult or something. But Melissa is kind of our own." Tom nodded, realizing that his son had expressed similar feelings. Melissa really was his soul. "I think so too," he agreed. "I'm glad you accepted it." Josh looked slightly embarrassed. "Well, if she makes you happy, then I'm all for it. You deserve it, Dad." Tom had to look away so his son wouldn't see the tears welling up. He hugged Josh. "Thank you, son." After meeting Josh, Melissa became even more a part of Tom's life. They no longer hid their relationship. Tom's colleagues noticed the changes and were happy for him. Bill, an old friend, egged him on that he should have immediately found a normal woman, not this Emily. Tom was no longer angry at such words. Perhaps he really had let go of the past so much that Emily's name no longer echoed with acute pain. The final legal formalities of the divorce were also completed in the fall. Tom received the official document of divorce in the mail. He looked at the cold, stamped lines and felt nothing but a slight sadness for the lost years. But Melissa sat next to him, her head on his shoulder, and quietly said, "You are free of this burden. Now only forward." Before Christmas, Tom, Melissa, and Josh began hanging out as a trio. Their son sometimes half-jokingly called them Team Harper Reeves, which flattered Tom. They went to hockey games, baked cookies at home, and Josh joked that the cookies were better than his mother's, earning him a friendly slap on the wrist from his father. One such evening, as he walked Melissa to her car, Tom stopped under the stars opposite her. The white cloud of his breath mingled with hers. The frost was growing stronger. Melissa raised her hands to her lips, warming them. Tom took off his gloves and took her hands in his. "It's warmer this way," he smiled. "You take care of me," she responded warmly, "even though you're left without gloves." "It's nothing." Tom kept his eyes on her. Melissa's cheeks were flushed from the cold. Her eyes glittered in the moonlight. He suddenly felt an overwhelming desire to protect her from any cold, from any pain. "Melissa," he said quietly. "Yes?" She also looked at him attentively, already understanding what he wanted to say. Tom felt a lump in his throat, but continued quietly but firmly, "I love you." It seemed to him as if the whole world had stopped, waiting for an answer. Melissa's eyes blazed with tears and joy at once. She stepped closer. Their hands, still clasped, were pressed between them. "I love you too, Tom," she whispered. He leaned down and kissed her, softly, tenderly, as if kissing something priceless. Melissa kissed him back, and in that moment all the mistrust, the fears, the shadows of the past finally retreated. There were only the two of them under the winter sky, bound together by a new feeling. Later, returning to the house to Josh, who was probably peeping from the window, Tom chuckled to himself. They were holding hands. 3 ruined lives began to form a new, common story. Tom felt it with every cell life was returning. Not the one that was before, but another, unpredictable, but real and bright. And he was ready to accept it with all his heart. On a summer evening, the 3 of them settled down on the shore of the lake, lit a small fire, and enjoyed the warmth of the fading day. There was no wind. The water lay like a calm mirror, reflecting the pinkening sky. Buster ran along the shore, looking for a pine cone in the grass or a ball dropped by someone. Tom, Melissa, and Josh were sitting on a blanket near the fire. They had just finished a dinner of hot dogs and corn cooked over the coals, and ahead of them were marshmallows to roast and aromatic tea from a thermos. "Hey, don't eat all the marshmallows without me," Josh jokingly threatened Melissa, getting to his feet. "I'm going to help Buster find the treasure." "Okay, just don't go too far," Melissa smiled. Josh whistled to the dog, and they both headed along the shore. Tom watched his son with his eyes, a tall, strong boy, almost an adult. At the end of August, Josh was going to college to use the athletic scholarship he had earned. Tom was immensely proud of him, but he knew he would miss him. However, there was no anxiety in his heart now after all. Next to him was someone with whom he would not be alone. Melissa moved closer and quietly hugged Tom around the waist. "What are you thinking about?" Tom smiled, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Looking at Josh, remembering how little he used to be, and now he's almost independent." "You raised him so well," Melissa said tenderly. "He's a wonderful boy." "You and I are both great," Tom replied. He knew Melissa was planning to visit her 15-year-old son in another state the following week. They had discussed the possibility of gradually bringing him back to live with her if things worked out. Tom supported her in that decision wholeheartedly. Melissa laid her head on his shoulder. "You know, I'm so grateful to fate for bringing us together again." Tom stroked her hair and looked at the smooth surface of the lake ahead. The events of the last year flashed through his mind, from that terrible night of betrayal to this quiet evening. How much pain he had to endure, but had it led to anything? Yes, this was the result of all the storms, a peaceful harbor next to the woman he loved and his son. "Me too," he said quietly. "If someone had told me a year ago that I would be sitting here with you, feeling happy, I wouldn't have believed it." "I would," she said softly. "Deep down, you always believed you deserved happiness, and you fought for it." Tom thought about her words. Perhaps she was right. He had not broken down completely, because somewhere inside he still had faith in a better life. The logs crackled softly around the fire, sending sparks flying into the air. Buster ran around Josh, barking as he tried to take the stick away from him. His son's laughter echoed across the water. "They're having fun there," Melissa noted, looking at them. "It's so nice to hear him laugh." "Yes," Tom agreed. "I haven't seen him so happy for a long time. A year ago, he was as gloomy as a storm cloud." Melissa looked at Tom and gently touched his cheek, turning him to face her. "You were gloomy and unhappy too. And now look, your eyes are shining again." Tom covered her hand with his own. "You brought that shine back to me. You and Josh." Melissa shook her head. "We all just helped each other." Tom chuckled softly. "Our therapy group." They smiled together. Then, in thoughtful silence, they watched as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky crimson and gold. "I've learned a lot this year," Tom said suddenly, quietly, as if to himself. "For example," Melissa pulled back a little to see his face. "For example, sometimes, in order to build something real, you first have to go through destruction," he said slowly, choosing the right words. "I lost my old world, but I found a new one, more sincere, more honest, and it is dearer to me than the old one." Melissa listened attentively, and tears glistened in her eyes, this time bright, joyful ones. "Yes, Tom," she whispered, "I feel the same way. It's as if we've put together a mosaic of a new life from the fragments of a past life, and it's beautiful." He pulled her gently to him, and they kissed against the backdrop of the sunset. In that moment, Tom finally realized he was no longer afraid to love, no longer afraid to trust. The wounds had healed and had become an experience, not an obstacle. "Hey, old men," Josh's mocking voice came from nearby. "Would you like to stop kissing? There are kids out here." Melissa burst out laughing, pressing her forehead against Tom's shoulder. Tom turned to his son, spreading his arms in mock embarrassment. "Sorry, man, couldn't resist." Josh came closer with a laugh, throwing a branch, which Buster immediately rushed after. It's getting dark already. Shall we roast marshmallows? I'm getting hungry. Do you have a hole instead of a stomach or something? Tom teased, standing up. But he immediately began to help. He put a white marshmallow on a twig and handed it to his son. Here, you bungler. The three of them sat around the fire. Josh held a marshmallow over the coals. Melissa poured hot tea from a thermos. Buster settled down next to them, resting his muzzle on his paws and looking at them curiously. Here's to us, Josh said suddenly, raising his stick of toasted marshmallows like toast. Here's to a new family. Tom's throat tightened. He clicked his teacup against his son's twig. For our family. Melissa quietly touched her glass to their toast to us. They ate marshmallows, laughed, washed down the sweetness with scalding tea. The first stars were shining overhead. Tom sat with his arm around Melissa, feeling the warmth of her shoulder, and looked at his smiling son, at the peacefully dozing dog. Deep gratitude spread in his chest for every moment that brought him to this moment. Even though the path was through pain and loss, the end result was worth it. What are you thinking about? Melissa whispered, noticing his absent-minded gaze. Tom didn't answer right away, but only pressed her closer to him and quietly said, that I am a happy person. A tear glistened on Melissa's eyelashes, but she only smiled, pressing herself against him. Josh, hearing, snorted cheerfully. Of course, what could be happier? Love and marshmallows on all sides. Everyone laughed. Night was falling on the lake. The firelight lit up the faces of the new family comfortably. Each of them had hardships and bitterness behind them, but new days were ahead of them, and they were ready to face them together. End. Thanks for watching till the end. See you soon. Bye, everyone. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.